Fat Bastard SL-25, Part 2. Last time on Pry Bar Knives.
What do we have here? Let's do a little unboxing. I thought this was going to be about an inch shorter, maybe. Something like that. But this sucker is beefy as hell. Let's pop it. Okay, nice. Oh, lock access is really good. I kind of like it. I think it'll be nice if I contour these scales, cut quite a bit of this fatness out, and make it feel better in the hand and make it all a little bit lighter. I think it's going to be a really nice knife when all's said and done. As long as you don't mind a big fat thing in your hand, you might like this one. Have a nice day. Bonus feature! Come on over to Knife Modifiers Unite. That's my new Facebook group.
Part 2.
What do we have here? We have this fat bastard Sixleaf Rattlesnake design. What is it? The SL-25. So let's get this thing apart, and we'll go get those scales out to the sander and fuck them up. Well, that's interesting. We got this body screw here, and then on the other side, there must be the other end hiding under the pocket clip, I guess. I don't know. Man, someone needs to come up with a nice, like, you know, mass-produced, decent pocket clip to replace. This is the Two Sons style, you know, budget pocket clip. It's on all, oh, there's the bolt hiding under there. It's on all the budget Two Sons and a lot of the Sixleafs. So, if someone was to make a replacement that fit all those knives, I think they would sell thousands, at least dozens. So, all right, we got one scale off. Boy, it's a pretty thick bastard. Boy, the liner underneath looks nice. Nice and clean, not rusty or weird. Let's see, what do we got here? Is this yeah, I don't know. Oh, okay. It's like one of those long hollow bolts type things. Oh, whoopsie. Shit. Are they the same size? Wow, that's interesting. That's weird. The one that's in the back that was hiding under the pocket clip is the same size as the other one? The pocket clip one's not shorter? Okay, whatever. All right, so we got it apart. Well, bearings are nice, ceramic bearings. Not too few like sometimes you see where they only have like 6 bearings or some shit. Kind of cheaping out. That looks good. Back spacer looks nice. Nicely done, G10. Oh, D-shaped pivot, nice. So even though they have a torque spit hole on this side, you don't really need it because it's a captured pivot. Interesting. I wonder why they bothered putting a screw hole on that side. Seems like a weird thing to do. All right, let's go make these thinner and more shapely. So we got these guys here, and they're pretty thick. And they have kind of 2 levels here, like this kind of first level that's flat, 90 degrees side. And then they have this, you know, kind of 45-degree angle edge going too. And those 2 are pretty close to the same thickness. So my aim is to kind of contour it down to maybe half of this thickness. Not the whole scale, just at the edge, about half of this thickness. But then at the thickest part in the middle, at least down some from the original thickness. So it'll be thinner all over, but even thinner than that at the edges where it's going to be sort of a rolled over type of a deal. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of run along this edge and bring this edge down, maybe a little bit past this kind of turning point here. And then the same thing with this edge. And then after I do some passes just to get it pulled down, I'll kind of round it out and go back and forth. This is a pretty rough belt right here. I think it's 80 grit. And if it goes too fast, I might switch to a little bit less aggressive belt, but we'll see how it does. I think it should work. I like to work in the area that doesn't have the plate behind it too. So there's a plate behind the sander down here, and that can be a little bumpy on these cheap belts because the belt hits the thing and kind of bumps out every time. So there's like a glue spot in the belt where the belt's glued together. See that little spot right there? And every time that hits a flat place like this, you get sort of a bump. So if you do it up here where there's no support behind the belt, you get a little bit more of a rounded action and a little smoother action. So we'll see how it goes. So as you can see, that's kind of what that Micarta looks like when it's cut with a rough grit sandpaper. You know, all this was done with a fairly, either a mill that was, you know, moving kind of fast and low feed speed with fine cutting implements on it so that it cut it nice and smooth. But this is kind of what it looks like when it's cut rough, sort of a white, powdery look to it. And even if I clean that off, it doesn't get that nice, pretty black until it's sanded with a higher grit. Let's see, do I have a higher grit I could hit it with real quick to show you? Maybe, yeah, this will do it. So this isn't super fine, but this is enough to show you what it looks like when you just sand it a little bit more with a higher grit. I could put a higher grit belt on the sander, but I don't feel like it. So we'll just do this real quick and you can see how it loses that whiteness when you just sand it with a little bit higher grit. So look at that right there is where I just sanded it, and it's starting to get back to what it looks like here. Still not quite there. You can still see the deep scratches there, but it's getting there. So a little bit more hand sanding and I'd have it down to looking good again. But this takes off material faster, so that's what I'm trying to do. Ouch! Get zapped on this thing a lot. It generates what do you call it, static electricity, like a what's that thing called that makes electricity by doesn't matter, it's a generator. So if I keep my finger up against it, it doesn't generate the electricity and zap me. It doesn't hurt that bad, but it surprises me. And sometimes it makes me drop the shit I'm working on because I'm so surprised by it. So if I keep my finger up against it here, it never allows it to generate the electricity. But it also makes it awkward to work. Okay, that's about as thin as I want to get near the edge, I think. Something like that. But then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side and then bring it across back and forth to make it kind of smooth. Always wear a respirator or, you know, face mask when you're doing this stuff because fiberglass is not great to inhale. You can see we're getting it a lot more contoured than it was before. Pretty soon we're going to break over that top and be sanding the whole thing. When you have an area that sticks out further than the rest, it makes it a little problematic because you have to bring it down to the same thickness as the rest. So it has to be at less of an angle. So this has to be a little more subdued coming up here than this one does, because this has more of an amount of area to cover than this one does. Also, if you think about the pivot bolt, you don't want to cut this area down too much or the pivot bolt will be sticking up a lot further than it was. So this area, usually, I don't cut down too much. Maybe I cut down a little bit more on the handle. So we'll keep that only down a little bit below what it originally was. So now you can start to see the curve that we're starting to get into it now. And I think this part's good enough for now. It's going to be, see how thick it is here compared to how thick it is at the edge now. Got a nice contour to it, and I think that's good enough for this part until we hit it with something a little higher grit to smooth it out. And then we'll hit the rest of the handle now. And be careful not to kind of, well, let's see. With an aggressive belt like this, damn, zap me again. With an aggressive belt like this, you do have to be careful, especially in the corners. This used to be a little dip in here, kind of like a little, thumb dip to access the blade and stuff, but it's going to end up going away and just contouring in with the rest. See, if I start to go back and forth right here, that's going to be all right. But if I go back and forth right here, I'm going to start cutting a weird slot in the edge of this. So you got to be careful. Guess I can show you. All right, if I go back and forth here, see, I just cut a weird little line right there because this is at a different angle than this is, right? So now I got to get rid of that. So let's take it back out of there. I think that got it. All right, so now I can go back and forth. Another place you want to be a little careful is where the screw holes are, because the head of these little bolts sits down in that place in there. And if you cut it down too much, the head of the bolt's going to be sticking up too high. I'm going to end up with this one sticking up a little high, and that's okay. I'll try not to do it too much, but I'm not going to be wimpy on it because I do want it to contour. But I guess I could contour it a little bit less here and a little bit more down this way. It'll still look good. I don't want this line across here to get all uneven, like get real thin here and then thick, then thin. I want it to kind of stay the same, and that's kind of a bitch to do. But it's, it's doable. Right now I'm kind of running it back and forth, but as I run it back and forth, I'm angling it just a little bit each time. Kind of like that. So that I get sort of a different line across it each time. And with the way this belt kind of bends in a little bit when you sand it, it ends up being pretty smooth. So let's see, how does this compare to the original? Definitely thinner at the edge, and a little thinner. Yeah, I think that's about what I'm looking for, something like this. So I think this is good until I hit it with the higher grit sandpaper. Now we're going to do the same thing to this one, and that's it. One way to sand it is to put it on something like a 2x4 in a vise, and then you can kind of hold it and be able to sand over it. And you can't do that on a flat table, but something that lets the sandpaper roll over the edges a little bit, like a 2x4 or a 1x, something like that works good. One way to sand it is to put it on something like a 2x4 in a vise, and then you can kind of hold it and be able to sand over it. And you can't do that on a flat table, but something that lets the sandpaper roll over the edges a little bit, like a 2x4 or a 1x, something like that works good. We have the rough finish versus the finished finish. So a lot smoother. This has been hand sanded to, I think, 200 grit, something along those lines. And this guy was just on the machine at 80 grit. So we'll hit this with the 180, 200 grit, whatever it is, and then we'll have two the same. I might throw it on the polishing wheel just to get it a little darker black, because that's about as black as it's going to get, unless I'll oil it or something. I don't know, we'll see. So what all did we do to this thing? Let's look at this piece of frame right here, or liner. I did a little, basically I just put a texture on. This bevel was already here, but I just laid the rough grit Dremel tool, that little sander bit against here, just to give it a little more texture. And then on this side, I did a little relief cut right here. It's not much of one, just making it, I don't know, maybe 10%, 5 or 10% thinner, so the lock bar would be a little easier to move, and maybe it'd be a little more drop shutty. That's my thinking on that. Okay. I didn't really want to mess with the detent strength, so hopefully that doesn't make the detent strength weaker, because the detent was really good. We did this, shortened the pocket clip, and dulled it, because it was real high polish. So I shortened that pocket clip a little bit, because it's so ugly and long with that stupid duckbill thing. I polished up the end again, but I don't really like it polished. So we're going to dip it in some ferric chloride and see if that gets it looking more like the blade and more like the liners. So let's see. We're going to dip it in ferric chloride, then in water to rinse it off. So let's see what happens. If it looks like good or if it looks like poop. And we're going to see if fishing line is good enough to hold up against the ferric chloride, because I couldn't find any titanium wire. Oh, that looks a lot better already. Okay, I'm going to get it all dripped off and then dip it in the water. Oh, wow. Yeah, that is exactly what I was looking for. Just sort of a matte finish. That is great. And before I did this, I cleaned off the part really good with alcohol and made sure there was no oils on it, because oils can stop this process from making it look duller. So I think that's exactly what I'm looking for. Let's get it back together and see if it looks good. Now it kind of, matches the blade a little better, I guess. And the liners. Clean the liners up. They're a little greasy and gross. And then we did the scales. And I was gonna take some sandpaper maybe and sand those scales, because they're a little tiny bit slippery. Okay, but I just like the way they look too much, so I'm just going to see if I can deal with the slipperiness or not. What I did do was put a little bit of oil on them, and the oil made them, I don't know, a little darker and maybe even a little tackier. Not sticky, but I don't know. I feel like they're going to grip okay. We'll see. So we'll get it back together. Nothing special on that, so I'm not even going to video that. We'll get it back together and see how it looks. Here we go. It's all put together. I didn't sand the scales. I doubled down and oiled them. I did take a little bit of a recess cut in this liner lock, so that's a little easier to unlock and a little easier to drop shut, which is not quite drop shutty still. Love how the scales feel. The only screw up, I took a little bit too much from where these bolts, this one bolt goes through. So this is tightened down as tight as it gets, and yet they stick up this much. I could chamfer the edges of these a little bit, and that would probably help. And that's it. That's all I can do, really. But otherwise, I really like how it turned out. Like, see, this one looks great because this is full thickness here. It didn't get cut down that much. I should have not cut down this back corner and not started cutting down till just past this screw. Then it would have been great. So, live and learn. But it's definitely way better than it was before. Before it felt like a brick in your hand. Now it feels like a nice, contoured, sexy micarta in your hand. And it really isn't too slippery. I don't know if the oil helped with that, or it just, I don't know. It feels really good though. The pocket clip got cut down and dipped in acid to etch it a little bit so it's not so chromy. If I pull these bolts out and put a little chamfer on them and dip them in the acid, we could get everything looking that same kind of dull steel look. So, a little update. I went ahead and pulled that hollow bolt and the nut or screw out of this part and chamfered the edges on it, so it's a lot less annoying in the hand. It actually was kind of annoying. It had like a nice little corner, or a nasty little corner there. And it wasn't nasty, but you could feel it, like a hot spot. Now it's a lot better with the little chamfered edges on the screws. You can kind of feel it, but it's not bothersome at all now. I don't know. I don't know if we'll do that. Kind of like it the way it is, though. I think it's fine. SL-25 Rattlesnake design after some modding. Really, really nice knife. Nice, full size, very fidgety. Front flipper's great. Back flipper's great. Top flip? Yep. Reverse flick. Thumb flip. It's D2, nothing fancy, but really nice knife. I recommend it, but then send it to me so I can pretty it up for you. Have a nice day.